Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the BrickSide Chat Podcast, where we take your questions and turn them into conversations. My name's Evan.
And my name's Paul.
And today we're going to talk about taking control of a project and really how to plan a project.
Yeah, projects come in all shapes and sizes. They don't need to be something huge. They can be something really small. But before you embark on any kind of project, you really want to make sure that you have assessed it within reason and come up with your game plan for how you're going to get it done, and maybe most importantly of all, whether you should even start on it. We have lots of random ideas that we come up with all the time, and oftentimes we talk about them for 10, 15 minutes, maybe even a couple days, and then we end up just tossing them because they don't really make sense to do. And that really is the first step of any kind of a project. Is conceiving the idea in the first place and your motivation for wanting to get started on the project.
Yeah, and I think there's two main reasons why you should decide to start a project. Probably the most common reason I would say would be you're trying to find a solution to a problem that you currently have.
Definitely.
Or develop a solution to that problem.
Definitely. I think a lot of people think that projects are only started when you are creating something.
Right.
But
and that's the other way. That's creating a product or creating something. Those are the two main types of projects.
Definitely.
Or reasons to start. But
most projects that we embark on end up being something that we're just trying to solve a problem, or it's just normal expansion. I think the most common project, well, maybe not the most common project, but the most common larger project is adding new drawers to the wall, or expanding, putting up new walls in the garage, the ever ongoing project. But starting a project in terms of trying to solve a problem can range from anything to trying to develop a faster way to ship items out to trying to design something to help motivate your employees to work more quickly, which a project doesn't have to be something physical. A project can be something intellectual too. I'm not just talking IP, but I mean quite literally in that if you have a problem that is like motivation or something, you might need to start a project in order to try and solve that. And It won't involve building something.
Right. And there's really, really tiny projects. Like you can go really, really small and you can get really, really, really big. A project is such a broad word in terms of what we're trying to talk about here.
Definitely. I would say that really a project is anything where you have to think about it before you do it. Is really, for example, shipping orders every day, I would not call a project because it's just something I do. But maybe building a box for a particularly large order, that might be a project.
That might be a project. Yeah, so when you're looking at the kind of project in terms of you're trying to fix a problem or come up with a solution in order to fix a problem, there's a few key things you really need to look at. One of them is going to be, how much is this project going to cost? Let's say you have a problem, and that problem costs you, we'll make it easy, $100 a month. If this project in the development or whatever you're going to do to complete this project to solve this problem is going to end up costing you $10,000, now you're talking 100 months before you even see a return. It's like, okay, well, that's like 8+ years. Is that worth it? So you need to kind of do that analysis as to the cost of this project and completing this. Does it actually save me money? And am I going to gain anything from this cost that I'm investing?
Definitely. And just because it takes that long to pay off doesn't mean it's not worth it. It's just something to think about. How many businesses, is this problem still actually going to be a problem in 8 years?
Yeah, and that's for sure a big thing with the problem and solution case is determining whether or not it is essentially a profitable purpose or a profitable project that you're starting. In terms of the product creation, let's say you're making something, you're developing a physical toy or something, or maybe you're making new acro units to sell them I don't know, whatever you're doing. Keep in mind the time that it's going to take, and will this be relevant when this project's complete? So if all of a sudden you and 10 other people are trying to do the same thing and you think yours is going to take you 2 years to do, in 2 years, is there still going to be competition, or has everyone going to have come out with their stuff and now the market's flooded and you don't have anything?
Something else, like let's just say we wanted to get like custom nice boxes for every order. Like not custom in terms of it shows the order information on it, but custom in terms of like not just cardboard, but something nicer, stuff like that. Sure, that would be nice, and that might increase the worth of our product, but is that really going to be worth it in terms of is that actually going to be the deciding line between a purchase and not a purchase?
Well, we also talked about this last time. Is it worth buying something or investing all this money into something? Like, let's just say you were doing that custom boxes. It was custom printing and it was like completely graphic, or I don't know, whatever. But is it like, let's just say you have to order 20,000 boxes and you only do 1,000 orders a year. Are you for sure in the next 10, 15 years still going to be using these boxes? Or is that just something where it's like, it doesn't make sense? So think about, like, tie that into your project as well. Over
Absolutely.
the time, is it just going to be a waste because it's cool for now, but the longevity of whatever you're doing isn't actually going to be there?
Yeah, I do want to circle back to the problem and solution real quick and just talk about actually understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, because you might spend all this time trying to make a solution for a symptom of a problem, only to discover 2 months later that the problem is just manifested in a different way because you didn't solve the underlying thing. So when you're scoping out a problem to fix, make sure that you're trying to fix it at the root cause, assuming that is, it might be cheaper and more effective to just bop down the problem every month when it resurfaces under a different name. But a lot of times it's probably going to be better to go ahead and find the root cause and deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to just cover things up and then realize that you have done nothing.
Whenever you're working on a project, there's usually multiple people involved who have a stake. Now, the term stakeholder does not mean shareholder. For a public business, it might definitely mean shareholder. But this podcast, I mean, if you're a big business listening, great to have you. But mostly we're more orientated towards small businesses. So I don't think a lot of small businesses are going to have a large shareholder portfolio. So a stakeholder is really just anyone who has an interest in seeing the project outcome go one way or another, usually positively, I would hope. But employees are stakeholders. So are you. So are your managers. Your competitors might even be stakeholders if you are developing something for the general business community, right? Or something like that. The YouTube channel would be a perfect example of that. Stakeholders can include customers, and many of the people that watch our YouTube channel are our competitors as well. But they still have a stake in the success of the YouTube channel because we help give them information that I hope they like. So making sure that you're understanding all of your stakeholders, because if you go through the time of creating this either solution or this product, and then someone gets so unhappy about it that it ends up costing you more, maybe you, in the case of doing this, do something that crosses a line ethically with a supplier, and you didn't even think of that, and now you lose your supplier. Right. I mean, that's a pretty worst case thing. But just keep in mind all of the different people that have stakes in the project as you're going through this. And you want to make sure that you're placating all of them, but also prioritizing them. Certain stakeholders are going to be more important than other stakeholders.
Yeah, that's something we'll get to in a little bit, but you don't want to take into account too many people's opinions. There is a point at which you start to try and people please and stuff, and all of a sudden you have like 75 ideas coming at you and you're trying to say yes to each one. That we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's a big issue. So there is a kind of a cutoff that you need to
absolutely
make and determine who's actually the most valuable in terms of for whatever this project is, who really should have the say. Because if you have too many, then it does get very, very challenging.
And I do really want to stress that that's not just customers, especially if you're working on something with really skilled labor. having happy employees, I mean, we say this like all the time, but having happy people is just better. So a very important and valuable stakeholder is going to be, especially with very skilled positions, is going to be ensuring that the people there approve of the project and want to give it their all.
Yeah, and another thing with that too is like, let's say you're building a building, or you're about to move your business into a custom built building. You bought the land, I don't know, whatever. Everyone's stake may not be equal for the entirety of the project. When you're working on the foundation of that building, certain people's perspectives are going to be significantly more important than when it comes to the utilitarian work.
Absolutely.
Because obviously the contractors you want to have do the structural stuff, but the people who work in your store, they might have a good understanding of utility type things, not electricity and stuff, but like how the layout of the store might need to be.
Yeah.
Versus then, other people investors who they're just like, well, we want to make sure that this is as energy efficient as possible so we get tax incentives. So like everyone's weight comes in differently at different points in the project too, not just based on who they are for the entirety of the project. Yeah,
and that can be one of the toughest things to manage is making sure that everyone feels included, but a good strategy for this is making sure that people understand that they are going to get their turn to have input, not their turn to make decisions, but their turn to have input. You might tell your employees, hey, I really appreciate that you have this list of preferred concrete brands for our new floor, but I'm sorry. However, when we get to laying out, which room is going to have what purpose, maybe we can talk then, because you guys are going to be moving between them all day. Right. And that would be something to keep in mind there. So obviously, once you kind of have an idea, setting an objective is going to be really important, because you want to be able to sum up the purpose of your project, depending on how complex it is, anywhere from a sentence to a couple paragraphs. But this shouldn't be an 800-page document detailing every little tiny piece. This is just the highest level, like,
what is the goal of the project?
Yes. My goal is to be able to fit more pieces in the garage, right? That would be like, an objective, right? And then from then on, you can very easily ask anytime something comes up is this fulfilling the objective? Is this fulfilling the objective? Oh, you want to add a complete kitchen. Well, that doesn't really fulfill this objective. So probably not. That kind of thing. And that's going to play in later. To something that we're going to talk about, but setting an objective is going to be really important to managing achievement.
Right. And once you have that objective set, now you're on the beginning of a path in terms of accomplishing that project. But before you even work to accomplish, you also need to determine, just do some sort of feasibility study. Determine, is this a viable thing in terms of cost, in terms of time, manpower, resources, whatever it might be. And you need to really break down your project and think, is this worth it? And this is really, really, really challenging, I think.
Absolutely.
Especially for small businesses.
Yeah.
For a big business, they have people in place, they have an understanding, they have history and stuff. But for a small business, I think there's a lot of ego that also jumps into it, where it's just like, I really want this. Maybe not ego, but like a lot of hope. Yeah. And it's like, you really want this thing. So it's really hard to take a step back and really look, is this worth it for what we're doing? But it's really imperative, I think, that you do that, because you don't want to step into a project that you estimate is going to cost $20,000. And all of a sudden, 2 years later, way past what you were expecting, now you're talking at $50,000 or something like that. Like, that's a drastically big difference. So you really need to be smart with how you evaluate it and take a step back from the business owner and just look at it from a purely statistical perspective as to, does this make sense?
And because of inexperience, you're not always necessarily going to have access to all of those statistics. And so factoring in your own lack of knowledge is a risk factor, and something that might contribute to this failing that you also need to consider is understanding that you might not understand this project and looking at it and going like, do I think that I'm going to be able to learn this on the fly and have this turn out well? Or from my little bit of research that I've done so far, does this look so complicated that attempting to embark on this is going to cause all kinds of problems because of my lack of knowledge. And part of this is a self-esteem thing. You don't want to undersell yourself or oversell yourself. Learning on the fly might be your greatest strength. That might be like your number one thing. And if so, then that might be less of a risk. But for a lot of people, making sure that they understand their own knowledge and are factoring that in is something that is a really important skill to learn just for all of business, right?
Yeah. So how do you do a feasibility study? I think the first thing you need to do, and probably the most obvious thing, so most people will have thought of this, is just a cash flow analysis, like just a general look at your cash flow and understanding, is this project something we can afford? And not only when the project is going on, but in the long term too.
Yeah.
Like, maintenance and all that kind of stuff after the fact. Another big thing with cash flow is, let's say you're going to throw in $5,000 a month to this project. Right now, we'll say you can sustain that $5,000 a month. But what if the project ends up taking 100% as long as you anticipated? Can you continue to throw $5,000 in? And then, if you can't, or if you make that determination like, oh, we need to stop at this point, and if you do keep trying to throw money in, is this project going to kill your business?
Cash flow strangulation is definitely something that I think a lot of businesses feel. I mean, you can never have too much cash. Well, maybe you can if, your currency's inflating a lot. But otherwise, cash flow strangulation, I think, is a silent killer for a lot of businesses, where they keep on taking on all of these monthlies or just expenditures, and then slowly they start to realize, oh, I cannot afford X this month. And so making sure that you're able to keep operating with this, even in tough times, is going to be really crucial. Like, sure, you might have $10,000 of cash on hand right now, but what about all of the unforeseen expenses that are going to crop up and are going to need money later? Like, not even after the project is done. You might be looking at this in the sense of, I have money now, I'm going to put it in a savings account and pull it out as needed. But what if you have to dip into your monthly expenditure? Is that something you're willing to do? And is it going to harm your business? Because depending on what type of company you're running, but I think for most companies, the project is something that's happening in addition to what you're doing. Unless you're like a dedicated R&D company or something, in which case I don't really know exactly how that works. But for most companies, a project's going to be something that's kind of running on the side. And you want to make sure that that project does not become your business.
Yeah, unless that project is your business from the beginning, as in you're starting it as a business, like a totally separate thing. You don't want your project to overtake your business if it does not have positive cash flow or is at a point where it's really close or something. You don't want to destroy the business that you've built over the past however many months or years because you decide to try to do a project and then that project overtakes the business. There's a point at which you definitely need to say, this is it. We spent too much money. It is what it is. We have to call it. It doesn't make sense. And that's that...
we talked about it.
Wow, it just escaped my mind.
We talked about this in, I think, Stepping
Sunk cost
Stones
fallacy.
Yeah.
Wow. There is a point where you just call it because it just costs. It's too much. Yeah,
and that can be a really tough moment, but it is something that you need to be prepared for and emotionally ready for from the very beginning. Yeah. Emotionally, you need to be in the mindset of, I'm ready to call this project. And I'm waiting for the sign.
That's where it's really hard as a small business, because you, as the owner of that business, are probably incredibly invested into whatever that project is versus the CEO of a very, very big company who has an idea of the project and stuff, but at the end of the day is really looking at the numbers, or the COO
for success,
or something.
Plan for failure.
Yeah. So that's number one for when you're doing a feasibility study, is really think about that cash flow and if this is going to destroy your business if the project fails. The second thing you should just look at in general with the project is its chance of failure. And within that, there's a couple different types of failure. There's internal and external. External could be things like weather, like maybe you're building a building and it all of a sudden rains for 2 months straight. and you
Yep.
just can't pour foundation or anything.
Or
Large scale market shifts would be a big one.
Yeah. Something for weather that might bring this a bit home is if you're organizing a convention or a fair or some large thing, and you're spending tens of thousands of dollars pumping marketing in this to try and get like a booth at something, or just something like that, and then weekend before weather comes, suddenly it's super stormy, maybe there's like a tornado or hurricane or something really big like that, and then it's just canceled, and all that money is potentially just gone.
And those are external though. So these are things where, maybe you can plan for it. Maybe you can say like, oh, let's just set aside $5,000 or expect maybe we have to spend $5,000 to
get insurance,
to rent tents or something. So if it rains, we're covered. Insurance is that next thing, where you can kind of, to a degree, reduce the amount of external factors if you have some sort of insurance. Now, depending on what stage your project's in, and if it's a physical thing or if it's like some hypothetical thing that you're working, it's very hard in terms of what you can do, but they will sell insurance for anything. So you can probably get insurance. Now, to a degree, you need to determine whether it's even worth the idea or the cost of getting insurance, because of course that's an additional cost, but you might be able to mitigate some of these external factors or external things that would cause a failure if you have some sort of insurance. Liability stuff, like just make sure you have like general liability, like things like that, and then maintaining documentation of understanding what's happening. So if you're working with someone on the job, maybe they are a construction worker, and we'll just say they're an employee of you for some reason, and you don't have workers' comp or something, and they injure themselves while they're working, you don't want this one project that your business is doing, and this construction worker decides to sue you because you didn't have workers' comp and stuff. Or whatever, however that works. And then your business as a collective now is gone or really hurt or whatever because of this one project. So if you had something in place to mitigate that concept of if someone does hurt themselves, then your business should be fine. Maybe the project is done then, but at least the business that you've built is still there. And then of course, if you have the documentation there, is like maybe someone hurt themselves and later on you find it wasn't your fault or something. I don't know. That's a bad example.
Having really good documentation can help shield you from a lot of things, because I hope no employees are like this, but if you went through every step to detail every safety procedure and you are really on it and you can prove all of that, right? And then someone gets injured, it may be more likely that it will end up in your favor. No promises on that. But if you can show that you followed every step, that might be more likely. But another external factor...
And the injury thing is a bad example, I think. But, yeah.
Something else is, external market factors. That's something that you can influence to a degree, but it's still definitely external, and it might not be something that's worth... you might be able to, depending on the size of your business, you might be able to have some pull in the market. But a lot of times you can't really stop someone from doing the same thing that you want to do, but faster, better, because they have more resources. Mm-hmm. So that's just something to keep in mind. And also staying up with the current technology. Technology is changing really fast and always has. So if you're embarking on a really long-term project, make sure that it will still be relevant, because I would say that that's a failure. I would say that's some of like the most important external factors.
Yeah, so those are things to take into account when determining the chance of the failure. And then, of course, there are the internal factors that are significantly more within your control and your understanding. The first of them is, how reliant on limited resources are you, including manpower? Do you have, let's say, 10 people at your company, and all of a sudden you're going to pull 5 people away to go work on this special project? That will probably hurt, but that will guarantee to hurt your normal business if you pull 50% of your manpower for that. So that's definitely something to think about. How educated are you on this topic? You kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago, was if if you're really good at learning on the fly, then you're great. But if you know that you aren't great at just learning, however, and this is a project that you have no idea about, and you don't have specialists coming in or something, and you're just going to try, that might be something you should reevaluate then,
Definitely. I think another one that might get overlooked is the level of management expertise. Running a business is a constant learning experience, and you're always learning more effective ways to be able to make sure that everyone and every resource is being used, to in a healthy and like maximally outputting way. And if you are new to managing things, especially if this is your first bigger project, and I would say bigger project meaning that you aren't able to interact with every person like in the chain, like anything where there's like a middle manager, right? This especially comes into play. It's like, are you able to effectively orchestrate all these things from a higher level? I don't know how many small businesses are going to be dealing with this, but like anytime you have to delegate something off, there's a lot of management that actually comes onto you by making intelligent delegation decisions. And if you don't have a lot of experience making teams and just assessing resources, then that is something, you don't want to be. Everyone's had a boss that they don't like. And some people are just, nasty people. But I think a lot of times it comes from that the boss really just doesn't know how to manage people. And if you don't want to be that person. And this is totally learnable. It's totally learnable to become a good manager, right? It's a matter of education. But if your management experience level is not in line with the project, then that is a definite risk factor, because you might not be on top of everything to the degree that you need to be.
Yeah, now that's not saying, I think, that if you don't have a ton of management experience that you can't do this.
Oh, totally.
It's just something you need to factor in. If it's like a massive project and you're going, yeah, I could do it, and then you really look back and all of a sudden you're doubting yourself because you have then maybe rethink it. But yeah. It's not saying if you haven't done it before, don't try, because there's the only way to learn Correct. Is to do.
I'm not saying you need a business degree. Evan and I have learned most of our management stuff on the fly, basically, or like we look something up when we need to. I mean, we have gone to college, but I would say almost all of the management stuff that I've actually like put to use in business has been because I see, this isn't working. I should go look it up. Or just the simple, and you want to be careful with this, but ask your employees like, hey, I see that things are going a bit slow today. Like, is there something that I can do, right? Especially, this works really well on very small teams where the manager can, where you can have a bit more of an emotional discussion, I guess. But like on a small team where everyone knows each other, don't be afraid to ask and be like, hey, how can I improve this? And this goes back to the happy employees, right? A happy employee might be more likely to honestly tell you like, hey, we need more of X resource, or hey, I would just appreciate it if you messaged us more often with updates as to how the whole project's going, stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely want to say that I was not trying to communicate, hey, don't do this if you don't have a degree, or hey, don't do this if you don't have management experience. The most important thing is learning, but just like be aware of how managementally complex this project is going to be.
That was a mess of a sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just the complexity of management, not just that too, but the complexity of the project as a whole is something you should look at as well. How many things can fail on their own before the entire project fails? If you're working on something and you have this deadline and it's in 1 week and you don't hit that deadline in a week and you miss it, it's probably okay for one thing. But if it's like thing after thing after thing piling on top of each other where all these things need to line up perfectly, and if they don't, then it fails, kind of like a rocket launch. The weather needs to be good, like let's say you're launching something to the moon. Actually, that has more factors, I think. Like the moon needs to be in the right spot. I think we need to be in rotation around the sun somewhere nicely. There's all these things.
Yeah,
what?
Sure.
Am I totally wrong?
The moon does need to be in the right place.
Yeah. But like there's a lot more things. The weather needs to be right. The rotation of the Earth needs to be like a certain time. Everything needs to line up. So if one thing fails, you can't do your rocket launch, so you have to push it back. with a project, you want to avoid that if you can, or when you're looking at your risk assessment at the beginning, if there are 20 things that need to line up perfectly for this to succeed, it's just inherently risky. There's there's a degree of
randomness. Totally.
And it's scary. And you want to look at that ahead of time before you just go along with it and say, hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
You want, not to say you can't do a project like that. Of course, that's how a lot of things are successful in the world, but those are more dangerous and usually have a lot more risk associated with them. And so if you're a small business trying an additional project in addition to your business, and you don't have millions of dollars to back you or whatever it is, that might be something you want to table or think about, doing it in the future. If one of 20 elements fails, the whole project fails. That's a problem usually.
Yeah. But there are some times where you do just have to go for it. I mean, if you look at super successful people, a lot of them do just go for it. So, always, be aware of the risk, and we'll get to that more when we talk about planning the project. But the idea of conducting a risk assessment is to get some kind of number that you can look at and be like, am I willing to gamble on this?
Yeah. And then kind of the last internal factor, I think, of something you're really going to want to look at when you're understanding the chance of failure is what's the maintenance on this project?
Yeah.
There's maintenance in terms of just money, maybe. You just have to maintain it by providing money to something or someone. And that's usually what it ends up being. But there's also things like, let's say you build a vehicle and you're a car company. You now need to have probably a maintenance department that needs to open completely, which if you're starting a car dealership or company or something, maybe you've thought of, but you want to make sure you think of that ahead of time so that when you start selling your cars, you can now provide that maintenance service for people. Or it could be something as simple as cleaning a building. You got to clean the building, or you have to maintain the building.
Advertising.
Sure. Advertising. Yeah. Let's say advertising, period.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you release a product, that doesn't just mean it's over. You have to keep selling it. So if just because you've finished developing or engineering your project and it's available for purchase, you're going to have to continue to spend money trying to get people to purchase it, right? So that's something that you might have the best idea ever, but if no one ever hears about it, then you're not gonna make any money on it.
Okay, so I think next is planning the project. How do you actually go about planning the project? The first thing and the biggest thing after you've assessed all the risks and stuff, and sometimes you'll do this even ahead of time, is just this one bullet point of defining what the project is and what its scope is. What's it going to do? What is it not going to do? Etc. You want to really set up super clear expectations with this. You don't want to just throw something out there and say, we're going to do this. And it's like, it doesn't say what it does. It just says, we're going to make a rocket. And that's all it is. Or whatever it is. Like, that's very broad. You want to narrow it down and say, we're going to create a rocket that can be reused and the booster can land, and et cetera, to really understand the scope of the project. Something that comes along with the scope is the word or the phrase scope creep. And I think to a degree you need to understand that you will have some scope creep during your project. Every project I'm sure does. I'm sure nothing has ever been success, never had scope creep. If you don't know what scope creep is, it's essentially your project changing or evolving or having additions or whatever once the project has started. Ideally, you lay out in detail as much as you can about what the project is ahead of time, but there's going to be things that are forgotten or that are realized halfway through. So you're going to have scope creep. There are 4 main types of scope creep. So the first one is the business creep. So this is where the business owner, the partners, investors, stakeholders, whatever, change their mind about the desired outcome of the project. Or, change their mind could mean they want to remove something, or it could be like, oh, let's do this instead, or whatever it is. This could also be when you start the project, you don't truly understand let's say you're creating a product. You may not understand the business environment or the market you're trying to sell to. And you get halfway through the development and then you realize what market you're selling to. And so now you have that business creep of you have to rework the product in order to fit it into the market you're trying to go for. The biggest one with this is just people changing their minds, people not having a good idea of what they want. Maybe priorities change because their market was incorrect, or they decide that this product they're creating was made to solve a certain problem, but 6 months in, now there's a new problem and they want to shift this project to now solve that new problem too.
Yeah.
That's pretty much business creep. Do you have anything to add? Or
yeah, just that I guess an example of this that doesn't involve like creating a product would be you are reorganizing the layout of your inventory within your warehouse, and then you move to another warehouse halfway through reorganizing it. And so now the entire layout has changed. And a lot of what you did is probably still going to be useful, at least in concept, if you built shelves or whatever. But it's all going to have to change to some level now.
Right.
So,
yeah, the next type of scope creep is effort creep. So this is a really rough one because this is essentially where no matter how much effort you put in, you never see that light at the end of the tunnel. You just can't seem to make any progress. And some of the causes for this go back to when we were talking about management at the beginning, or not the beginning, I guess, 2 minutes ago, as some of the factors of potential risk or failures. So if you just don't have the knowledge to actually complete this project, you're trying and everyone on the team is really putting effort in, but they're not achieving the goals just because there's a lack of knowledge. That's a big one with effort. And then there's over optimism.
This is definitely something that I know we deal with a lot.
Absolutely. Where it's like we think we can, and we're over optimistic about whatever that thing might
I
be.
think that this is especially dangerous right when you come up with the idea for the project, and then also around like the midway point, especially when you don't realize you're at the midway point, right? It's kind of the early light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. There's that false light at the end of the tunnel.
And I think that is a definite cause of and I assume we'll talk about the sunk cost fallacy, but the over optimization can definitely show up. And another big part, I think, of the effort creep is when you aren't accurately tracking just how much effort is going in. That's definitely something. If you aren't updating your budget as you go, you might feel like you are drowning in progress, or that you're not making any progress when maybe you are, or vice versa. So,
yeah, you might think you're working and working and working and working, but you really haven't been. Like, you might think you're spending 40 plus hours a week in terms of the effort you're putting in, and then if you actually track all your stuff, it's like maybe you're only doing like 15 worth of work or something.
Yeah.
In which case, that's a problem.
Definitely.
Another type of scope creep is hope creep. So this is where you just believe without any statistical evidence that you can do it, which to a degree is a good train of thought. However, you don't want to just think you're going to hit these deadlines and hit these, meet these requirements when you have a history of not doing that. If you're just forever thinking, oh, well, it's the same amount of work. We didn't do it last time, but we'll do it this time. Like, statistically, you probably won't. But if you have this hope that you will, it's pretty bad. And this, again, just continues to tack on time and effort and stuff to the longevity of the project and generally delay it because you don't have a good understanding of actually what's going into it. A lot of the causes of what makes you believe things like this are stress and anxiety. So if you're just stressed about the project, or if you're really anxious to get it done, or whatever it might be, you might have that concept of just hopefully we'll finish, or hopefully we'll hit the deadline this time, and you really believe it, but you don't actually have any evidence. If you see that there's inaccurate statements, maybe you're having a team meeting and there's inaccurate statements, or you're not getting the truth out of your team or something, and but you're getting partial truths or something.
This also doesn't necessarily need to be intentional as well. Like, yes, people do. I don't want to necessarily call it lying, but people want to look good, and so they might downplay some things. But there's also just the fact of like sometimes information is plain out miscommunicated,
Mm-hmm.
or someone missed a part of their research, or something was glossed over. This is also part of why keeping documentation is really important, because if you show up with an agenda to the meeting and everyone has their list of talking points, it's going to make it way easier to not miss a problem. And
taking notes in that meeting, so when you come back to the next meeting, there's not this miscommunication of, oh, I didn't know we were supposed to do that.
Absolutely. That's totally a thing. And I think something else is like, oh, this is a minor problem, I can deal with it internally, I'm not going to mention it mindset. Which sometimes, yes, your duty, if you are like a mid manager, part of your job is to pick and choose what to communicate to your manager, because they hire you so they don't have to deal with everything. But there's a strong bias there to gloss over small little issues, and that can really hurt a project as well.
Definitely. And the fourth type of scope creep, and I would say the most common one, where everyone knows of this one, is feature creep. And this is where, there's a desire for more, just as the project continues. It's like, oh, let's just add one more thing. Or, oh, we have this. Well, what if we just put this in because it makes sense with this. Or we talked about the stakeholders earlier at the beginning. Everyone has their input. And as the project develops, people throw that input in. This is where you need to selectively choose what you're going to pull into this project and what doesn't matter. Because the feature creep for sure is something that just forever, well, it depends what the project is, but theoretically could just forever continue going.
Absolutely. I think another thing that makes this really hard, especially as you're learning, is determining the difference between fixes and features. Because something might look like a problem, but really actually what you're looking for is another feature. Because, if, for example, if something doesn't work, that's a problem. But if something doesn't work perfectly, is that a feature, or is that is that actually a problem? And I think it's very easy to cross the line from implementing fixing a problem to, oh, we can do this even better.
Right. If like you have a wash or you move into a new space and you have a washing machine or something, the right way to do it and a complete feature would be like, oh, I'm going to go get the right washing machine that I want to do whatever, and then I'm going to like build the entire drain system into whatever. Whereas you may not need to go that far, because there might be a drain if you put the washing machine in the other room. And that works. It might be slightly inconvenient because there's a doorway to walk through now, but that would be a fix versus a feature where it's like you got to go install this entire new drain system now because you didn't have that when you poured the foundation or whatever.
Definitely. And something I do want to talk about in regard to features for products, not for problems, is a lot of times customers aren't going to know what they're missing. I think we've talked about this before, but some things are obvious, that they're missing. But for a lot of things, if the feature's just never mentioned, it's quite likely that no one's ever going to notice that feature was never made. So that's something to keep in mind too, is asking like, do I really need this feature? Is this feature going to bring value to my product? And how much value is it going to bring?
Mm-hmm. So you really want to think about that scope creep. And do as much as you can ahead of time when you're planning your project to avoid as much of it as possible. Again, I think every project is going to have some degree of it.
Yeah.
Unless again, if it's a really tiny project, maybe not. But for any mid to large scale project, you're going to have any project that's going to take months, I'd say.
Yeah.
You're going to have some scope creep in a variety of ways, I'd say. So you need to figure out what factors, might cause it and plan for that ahead of time.
Yeah, this might involve making a list of, potential problems that might occur that are going to require solutions that you don't have, to expectations as to what your competitors might be doing and how you're going to need to change to react to that. Or just knowing that like this particular department, is very needy, or there's just all kinds of little things. And if you can make a little list of like, here are the things that I expect are going to be scope creep, and here is like a list saying, okay, yes, I'm going to approve things that usually come from this department because I trust that what they say usually is needed, versus like, here's something that I'm going to consider more, or just set up some like basic rules so that way you have some kind of a framework. So that way you're not stuck in meetings for 6 weeks trying to figure out whether something is useful or not.
Yeah. And just get ready to understand when to say no or yes. You might say yes to certain things, certain features, or when to say that's something we can probably do later. Because just because someone's throwing an idea at you and you can't do it now does not mean, when you move into your next warehouse, you can't do that or something like that. Obviously, if you're building a warehouse, then maybe you're not moving again. But
one last little thing that I want to throw on here before we move on is understanding that you're developing a product or solving a problem. You're not developing that specific feature or solving that specific micro problem. So don't get lost in trying to engineer the perfect solution for this specific feature. Keep in mind the project as a whole.
Exactly. So still in planning the project, you want to set SMART objectives. And SMART is actually an acronym.
Yes.
So specific, so you want to have it detailed with what's written. Measurable, so you want to be able to measure something. Achievable, you don't want to set it way out there where you can't just even like have any goal of reaching it. Relevant, it needs to be relating to the project. It can't just be like something cool because you're doing this that makes sense to do it now. And time bound, you want to make sure everything has a time that it's set to. It's not just like, we'll do it sometime.
Yeah. An example of this might be saying, we want. Oh, now I shouldn't have said to give an example, but like, let's just say we want to put up more drawers. That's not a SMART goal. Saying, this week we are going to put up 64 drawers. It's going to take under 2 hours, right? That is measurable. Right, you can say, yes, I put up 64. It's specific in that you're like specifically stating, okay, here is the goal, here is the time. And then you have like a final deadline saying like this week, by the end of this week, and it's going to take 2 hours. And it's relevant because, well, you're putting up drawers. So that would be an example of like a SMART goal.
Rough example, but yeah.
Yeah, very rough example.
So the next point when you're planning out your stuff is a work breakdown structure where you, instead of just saying we're going to go build a warehouse. Okay, actually that's too big of an example. Instead of saying we're going to move. We leased a space, we're going to move. You really want to then break down as much as you can into tasks that are, as small as they can be to an extent, within reason, of course, so that your entire team has an understanding of what you're supposed to do and what the tasks and steps are to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and I would start by doing this by dissecting into what I call big level zones. The work breakdown structure is pretty flexible, and it's going to change a lot depending on your project. But how I would recommend going about it is kind of dividing it up into these big chunks. And this is going to change depending on your project. But I would say like departments or units, meaning like big name features or just any kind of chunkable thing where each chunk is more or less independent or groupable by a resource, right? And you can pick whatever resource you want. And then you need to determine which one of those things or all of them need to be done at the same time. And once you have that, then you can get down to like something that's going to be more the same across everything, which is going to be ordering all of the components within each thing by priority, time, resource expenditure, and dependency being the big one, what needs to be done first. And
that's a hard one usually to figure out.
Yeah.
Because you may not realize when you're moving that, like it might not cross your mind that, I'm trying to think because we haven't moved, but you might not realize that you need your shipping station at your second location 100% up before you start moving inventory and you open. It might not cross your mind.
Yeah.
But then you'll get there and you'll realize and be like, oh, shoot, our shipping station's at our old location and we have 5 orders that need to go out. Like, random example, but dependencies are a hard one because it's really hard to forecast what is going to be dependent on something else. But it's really, really important because you will run into delays for sure once you hit a point and all of a sudden this isn't done because we didn't plan for it, but you needed it before you can move on to the next step.
And just like everything on this list, you want to make sure that you don't go too crazy on everything, right? You don't want to spend more. I mean, maybe you do, depends on the project, but you generally don't want to spend triple your budget for the whole project on planning.
Generally. Yeah.
And after you've broken it down, I would make sure that you talk about how you're going to manage this project. This is going to depend totally on your project. For little projects, this might not even be a discussion. But you want to make sure that you have some methodology for ensuring that these things are going to get done. Like some big name examples are like waterfall, agile, or just like breaking it up into daily tasks and just saying like, okay, here's what's going to get done today. Or
spreadsheet.
Or even just having a general timeline, which is, good for maybe some more intellectual or creative things where you can't force yourself to just sit down and do it. But having some kind of timeline so that way stuff still gets done is going to be important. And this is also going to determine how you're going to have your different departments, people, or sections coordinate with each other. Are they all going to go through you? Do they talk to each other? What type of oversight and management are you going to be running here?
Yeah, and you want to make sure when you're trying to figure out the schedule and stuff that you're using experience. And if you don't have experience with something, you're hopefully consulting with others who do either have experience or have some sort of idea, versus you just saying, 6 months, we're going to be done. And it's like the best company, biggest thing in the world couldn't do it in 6 months. So as a small business, you can't do it in 6 months either.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to be smart when you're creating the schedule. Don't create some unfeasible goal or unrealistic thing that you're going to try to achieve, but you're going to get nowhere near. We talked about this in another episode when we were talking about goal setting, where for you and I, it kind of works for us to set a goal that's like just barely achievable. And if we hit it, it's great. But if we don't hit it, it's actually still good, versus small goals that we always hit. Because it feels better when we get really close to a big goal versus these small goals. It's a totally different it doesn't work the same for everyone, but it's really good as a big team to not set big goals. The bigger the team, I think the smaller the goals need to be so that everyone feels like you're achieving stuff, versus a team of 100 people never achieves their goal because their goals are so outlandish that It just doesn't make sense. Because that's that morale. For us, it's fine when we're really small right now. But team morale is extremely important, and keeping your employees happy when it comes to the project development.
Everyone needs to know what to do. No one should ever just be sitting at their desk scrolling through the list of things, because none of them have instructions on how to start. Mm-hmm. Basically, would be.
Yeah, and that's part of that dependency thing too.
Yeah.
With creating dependencies, you can create a good order and then assign to certain people what their tasks really are. And then there's a good quote unquote step-by-step guide as to what needs to get done. Obviously, you don't want to create a real step-by-step guide because at that point you might as well have just done the work. But to an extent, you need to create a really detailed list. With also scheduling, it's good to understand that deadlines are going to be missed.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to hit a deadline 100% of the time. Now, if you're missing every single deadline or like 50% of your deadlines, there's a problem. But if you're missing one or two here and there, it's okay. So I'd say as upper management or something, you'd want to have an understanding and maybe even internal backup deadlines, if you want to call it that, where you have an idea of like, if it doesn't get done on this day, as long as we get it done 2 days later, we're actually still on track. Versus not having any sense of that, and then you're just confused and lost, and when it does get delayed, now your whole project is actually pushed back. So it's good to add a little bit of buffer in there, but not too much. If you aren't hitting your deadline all the time, you need to reschedule something because it's going to be a problem. And then determining the costs when you don't hit those deadlines is a big one. Is it like a $10 thing? Really little. It's like, oh man, we didn't hit it. Okay, tomorrow I'll finish it up, and it like was no problem at all. Or is it a big thing where it's like that was supposed, okay, that delayed the entire thing a month now, so we're still paying for this thing this month, and that's like $4,000, like much bigger costs or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last bullet point there is budget additional time for mess ups. I think that was kind of mentioned though, but
yeah, you're gonna screw up. So make sure that you're ready for it.
Definitely. And then the next thing is the actual budgeting in terms of the costs with your project. So time is a big cost that a lot of people don't, associate with something. So you need to definitely figure out how much time it's going to take. Not just saying like, oh, it's 6 months long before it's accomplished, but how many people are going to spend how many hours every week for how many weeks before we accomplish this goal. That's what you really need to factor in.
Yeah. And this is something that creeps up a lot, especially like, if you're dealing with multiple people, there's all the meetings in there. People aren't able to just sit and work. They're going to have to have problems solved and have dialogues. There are a lot of people out there that think that meetings aren't very useful, and a lot of meetings are not useful. But many meetings, especially during the early stages of a project where it's a lot more conceptual, probably are very essential. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that gets missed a lot. Also, there's this, I don't want to call it a myth because that makes it not true, but I would say not studied phrase that gets told a lot, which is 20% over time, 20% over budget. And that's something that's been told to me a lot, and it's something I've seen like online in discussions and stuff, but I've never seen anything saying like, oh, this has been studied. But generally the rule is that a project is going to be 20% over budget and 20% over time. And you should engineer for that and understand. I think the general message, rather than focusing on the 20% here, is that you cannot accurately plan every single item. So make sure when you're budgeting, you have extra resources put aside or ready to be used. Mm-hmm. So that way the whole project is not ground to a halt because you need an additional $50.
Yeah, I think a good question that'll come with this answer, and maybe you want to try to answer it, or not this answer, with this thing is, what if your project is taking 50% more and 50% costs, or what? Like,
that really depends on whether it's still profitable or whether the problem that's being solved still needs to be solved within the new resource limits. It's always better to do something for cheaper, assuming like it's not compromising quality. But you can spend more money and have less profit to a point, and then eventually you're not making profit anymore. So really this is about setting up a call, is to say like, this is the maximum resources that can be expended on this project. And at that point, you should call it. Mm-hmm. But maybe 50% is acceptable, especially if you're brand new. I don't know about being acceptable, but things are going to run 50, 100, 150, 200% over time.
Yes.
If you don't have a lot of experience, it's happened for us. It still happens for us, where things sometimes take like 300% longer. I mean, generally that number is more relevant for smaller projects where you get up into these crazy hundreds of percents, right? Because that's where an extra 10 minutes has an impact. But
right.
It's really up to you to make that call and hopefully have figured it out beforehand as to what your like maximum budget is.
Right. Something to take into account too when budgeting, and again, this is for bigger projects, but if you have a team of 2 or 3 people when you're doing something, for the most part, those 2 or 3 people have a good concept of like how much is allocated for everything. But if you have a team of, let's say, 50 to 100 people, they're on separate teams too. It's not just 50 people working independently. So you need to allocate a budget for a certain team and for that task that team's achieving or working to achieve. And you need to communicate that with them and everything so that it doesn't feel like to them, they know the budget of the entire project is, let's say, $1 million, but they only get 150,000. You don't want them to think, oh, we can probably take like 250 grand. Because then all of a sudden, if everyone thinks that, now your entire project has expanded to like 150 or 1.5 million instead of the 1 million budget. So you need to allocate and communicate with each department what their budgets are and stuff. And if it's a big project, I'm sure this is, something that's getting done. But even a medium project as you start to expand, maybe.
Don't just send someone to Home Depot with a company card. Tell them.
Yeah, unless they know what they're getting and why they're getting it, etc. Yeah. Factor in what type of resources need to be added later. From the people you start with and the money you start with, it's probably not going to cost consistently exactly $5,000 every single month for the course of the year you're working on this project. It might go up, it's going to go down, wherever, things are going to fluctuate. So keep that in mind when you're budgeting, and it's not just a flat cost.
Correct.
It'll definitely fluctuate. We talked about, the future maintenance costs, and then also what happens if this project, or product or whatever it is you're making, you release it, you sell it, and then in 5 years you want to be done with it. What does it cost to take it down or to stop it or whatever? For little things like, moving to a warehouse or stuff, the costs of removing everything out of the warehouse could be relatively minimal. But if you're a business that works in, nuclear waste management or something, what are the costs of that going to be when it comes to your business goes out of business or you're decommissioning a plant? Like those costs are astronomically higher. So depending on what your business does, you need to think of, those obsolescence costs at the end.
Yeah, this dooms a lot of businesses where this dooms a lot of businesses where they don't have a good idea of how to cancel a product. And you also got to think about refunds sometimes. If you release something and then immediately cancel it, you may have to issue refunds or someone might come after you. And, this really depends on where you are and what laws are like. But, I bought a smartwatch not that long ago, an Amazon Halo, and it was canceled. And they are issuing refunds for everyone that bought one after 2021.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And that's a lot. I mean, for Amazon, I'm sure it's not a lot of money, but if that was us and we had to refund every Lego piece that's been sold in the last year, that would be a lot of money. So just make sure that you can get out.
Yeah. This kind of jumps also a little bit into permits, fees, cleanup costs, insurance, stuff like that. Obviously factor that in. If you're building a building, you're going to need permits. If you're doing something in the city, there will be fees. If you're, the cleanup costs are things that come with it. And insurance is something that, the larger your business grows, the more insurance you're going to end up spending. If you're starting a new project that doesn't fall under your current umbrella of insurance, then you might have to get separate insurance. There's a lot of things that you just need to factor in and really think about. Maybe you're starting a new product as well, and you're going to sell this product as a different company or something.
Yeah.
Now you either have the legal fees of starting a new company or a DBA or something. And then, there's a lot of costs that are associated with that. So you want to budget that all in as well.
Even just something as simple as renovations. I assume that this is true everywhere, but at least in California, there are lots of types of changes that you need to get permits for, even on your own property. So just, keep that in mind.
So we're still in planning, but with planning, you need to do some risk assessment as well, or kind of risk management. You want to identify what those risks are and how you're going to manage them should they happen. So, there's preventative steps, of course, where you ideally don't, some stuff doesn't happen usually. That would be the goal. But if something does happen, you need to figure out what you're going to do. And there's kind of three different steps if you want to get into that, or tiers of which risks could be.
Yes. If I can read. Okay, yes. So I wrote this, I should know. I kind of have broken it up into three types of risks or failures that you can have. More risks. And the first one is going to be negatable. So this is something that you can expend a resource to make go away. And a resource might just be being careful. So that would be time, maybe. It slows you down. But there's something you can do to just outright remove this, or at least reduce the possibility to near zero. Something like this might be getting insurance, or having a medical kit, or reading the Wikipedia article. Just something basic like that. And negatable doesn't necessarily mean ahead of time. It might be something where you put money aside to deal with something so that you can fix it when it shows up, right? The next is going to be survivable. These are things you can't outright remove. Maybe you can reduce the chance of a little bit, but it's a risk that you probably can't stop, but you can know about it. And this is not going to destroy your business or your project, but it is going to harm it in some capacity, and I would call this survivable, meaning that you can successfully navigate your way through this should it happen. And this is something that you might want to save resources for or just accept, right? And have a contingency plan to be able to recover as quickly as possible. And then the last is total failure. This is going to be something that if it happens, you just are out of luck. Project over, potentially business over. There's really no recovery. And this is something that you're going to want to look at as how likely are these things to happen, because every project is going to have something total failure. Nuclear war starts, and your business suddenly doesn't mean anything because we're buying things with bottle caps. So obviously that has an almost 0% chance of happening. And so you can probably safely ignore that. But when you're calculating your risk here, you want to look at how many total failures there are and how likely they are to happen. Same thing with survivable. Enough survivable things all happening simultaneously might be a total failure. So that's kind of the three types of risk that I've created. And the first step to dealing with these risks or threats is going to be negating those that can be negated with an acceptable cost. Just because you can negate something does not mean that it's intelligent to. First impulse might be remove every risk, but some things are so inconsequential or so unlikely to happen that you should not expend the resources, even though theoretically you could negate it. And for those things that you can't negate ahead of time, make sure that there's easy access to the resources necessary. So whether this means writing it all up in a book, which is available and always in a bright red binder, on the desk or something like that, just so that if something happens, it's easily accessible, to just educating employees about the safety features of your building, right? So, and everyone knows where the phone is, right? If you're thinking more injury, have everyone know where the med kit is, have people be CPR certified. Those are things where injuries are still potentially going to happen. I hope not, but if they do, everybody knows how to respond properly. And make sure that you have an exit strategy for things if your project does fail.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's a big one, because, if let's say you have this project and like we had mentioned earlier, you have 10 people or something in your business, and then you pull, we won't say 5 because that's too many, but you pull 3 of them away to do this project. Your business now knows how to operate with 7 people. 3 people are working on this project. Ideally, your business is not hurting because of the project. It kept up or whatever. So now have you spent, or let's say the project fails, do you get rid of these 3 people? Do you throw them back into the regular business, and now your business is either expending more money than it needs for the production it is, or it's going to increase? You need to have a plan so that you're not stuck with not knowing what to do or letting people go or whatever.
Absolutely.
And I think it's fair, and I would say some people would probably argue this, but I'd say it's fair to let people who are working on a project know what is probably going to happen if that project doesn't work.
Correct.
Don't scare them, but don't lie to them and say, oh, this is going to be perfect. They need to have an understanding as to what might be coming, I think, personally.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are limits there, because if you lay out every single risk,
oh, of course,
people are going to quit.
I just mean in terms of if you tell them what's going to happen if the project is done completely or something. Not like you tell them every possible option.
Definitely.
But you just give an idea. Yeah. So we talked a lot about planning a project and what elements you want to have, but the most important part of this is not just mentally thinking about all these things, but actually writing them down. So there's a few things you can use to actually write it. Of course, you can write it on a piece of paper, with a pen or a pencil or crayon or anything.
And
I don't care.
for simple projects, that's going to be probably your best option. If this is a 20-minute, even a day project, and it's not very complicated, just write down step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. on a piece of paper, so that way you don't forget if you're like me, and that might be good. But
yeah, and then for other projects that are a little more advanced than something you just want to write down on a piece of paper, Google has a series of options that are free if you have a Google account. Sheets, docs, if you're making presentations, slides, use Google Calendar to schedule things. You can use Google Meet if you need to do virtual meetings, like all free stuff. And then if you're doing a bigger project, you could work for something that's potentially paid. I know Trello, I think, has a free thing, but then you can also pay for it to do larger project management things. Or there are many, many, many other significantly more advanced project management tools for significantly larger projects. We just don't have any experience with any of those. But yeah,
making sure that you have a tool, making sure that everyone that needs to have access to it has access to it. Using one of these tools is going to really help ensure, because once it's written down and someone says, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do this, it's very easy to say, like, hey, you have a Google Doc with your name on it that we went over in orientation you're supposed to check every day, right? And it's not just about like attacking an employee. It's just making sure that things are written down is really great, because everyone honestly forgets things. Sometimes, especially with larger projects, things are so complex that you're going to have to circle back to something you said 6 months ago, and no one's going to remember what they said 6 months ago. So that's why having these tools and implementing them properly and making sure you stick with them. This is, I think, something that a lot of people, at least for me personally, with managing my own projects outside the business, is I will sign up for something that I'm going to use to track something, and then I'll not update it. And I guess that happens a little bit in the business too. But making sure that you stick with whatever your choice of organization is, so that way people can rely on it. They're not going to use it if, rightfully so, it never updates, things aren't reflected.
Yeah, and definitely the more people you add, the more important this becomes. If it's you yourself and that's it, then maybe you're fine, because a lot of it is mental and what you're remembering, but there are notes that need to be taken. And then as soon as you get to a team of like more than one person, communication becomes incredibly important, and writing down what stuff is incredibly important, especially as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot more time goes too. So that's something else to budget in, is just understanding that the documentation ends up taking a lot of time.
Yep. Every person you have to manage is going to add a little bit more time on.
Yep. Absolutely. So hopefully this episode helped to, or will help maybe if you want to start a new project, or if maybe you're expanding your business or something. Hopefully this is something that can help break down how to plan a project and stuff like that.
Definitely.
It is, I think we went very deep. So if it's a small project, a lot of this may not be relevant, but for the mid to larger size projects that a small business might be doing, I think these are a lot of points in which you should really think about.
If you have any recommendations for people working on projects, don't hesitate to post a comment down below. Or if any of these suggestions that we've given haven't worked for you or have worked for you, we'd always love to hear about it, because we obviously do projects too, and we're always looking for advice. So if you are listening to this on a podcasting platform, please go check us out on YouTube at Just Brick in the Bucket. And
or the other way too.
Yeah, or the other way. If you're on YouTube and you want to go check us out on a podcasting platform, so that you don't have to pay for premium or leave a window open and just listen to us, you can go ahead and check us out on most podcasting platforms. But please, if you are on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you are on a podcasting platform, follow, subscribe, whatever it is for that specific platform. And of course, you can join our Discord server. The link is in the description of every YouTube video. So you can check us out there. There's a lot of people. It's mostly Lego focused, but there are a lot of smart people there who have some awesome advice. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching or listening. We will see you in the next episode of the BrickSide Chat Podcast.
Goodbye.